Hello and welcome to another episode of my NT marriage. I am not an alcoholic. This is in reference to a counsellor that we had, I shall put links somewhere, who had said that I was an alcoholic. And that had really offended me. I remember at the time I was really paid off. So, as always with these situations, there's always backstories and sort of starts, middles and ends. So let's start at the start. Before my partner, to give you an idea of the type of drinker that I had a boyfriend and we were together for 2.5 years. And in that time, I got drunk twice. So that just goes to show I was never a really big drinker. It was not on my agenda to sort of go out on a Friday, Saturday night and get hammered. That was just not my scene. So we meet, my partner and I'm still not a big drinker. Those 3 years that I was with him in his small country town and I was really depressed, he'd sort of started to kind of hint a little bit that maybe I needed to engage in activities that would numb my mind. So he started to notice that my depression, was really bothering me, really playing a part in everything. And his idea was sort of, maybe you drown your sorrows out kind of thing. But still, we never really did anything. It wasn't until we moved to where we are now that we started socialising with neighbours and such, and they all had wine racks. And we have a wine rack, it's like 12, fits 12 bottles. And we'd go to the neighbours and they'd have these huge wine racks that like fit 50 million drinks in there, and we'd go there for dinner and they'd say, "How do you want a glass of wine with your dinner?" "Sure, no problems," yada yada. And then we're having them over to our place and we're like, well, we need to buy some wine. We don't have any wine and these people drink wine, so, we should get some wine. And from there we started to join a wine club, and we're going about 16 years back now. After a while it just becomes this like new normal, having a glass here with dinner when visitors come over and such. And it grew from there. So it starts off this, wine here, wine there when people come over for dinner. And it was gradual. I mean, like I said, we're going back 16 years. Really gradual. Gets to the point where maybe 8 years ago, it's to the point where if I was cooking, it'd be like, a little bit of a, red wine in the bolognese sauce, and it's kind of like some for the sauce, some for me. So I pour myself a little glass, I'm sipping while I'm cooking, it grows from there. And as I said at the start of this video, I was talking about how this relates to Counsellor Terry, and she had called me an alcoholic. And it was like I would have a glass while I cooked, but I could go without it. It wasn't this thing where I absolutely had to open a bottle and absolutely had to have a drink. But now and again, if I opened a bottle to put in some cooking, then I would have a glass myself, because why not? And so from there it grows to, it would be like a Friday night, and by this stage I was really, I'd say depressed, but depressed wasn't the thing. It was more than that, and it was different. For those 3 years that I was with my partner in his small town and I was really depressed and unhappy and miserable, that depression was different to the depression that I was feeling at this point in time. So as I've mentioned, we're going around to neighbours, we're having dinner here, dinner there, meeting all these different people, these different couples, and they just seemed to be so much more content and happy. And sure, we only seeing them for a snippet. They could be faking, just like we were faking. But I started to feel really, I suppose, despondent, that's probably a good word for it. Really like, how did I get here? Why is my life this way? This is not the life I wanted for myself. We didn't go out, we didn't go dancing, we barely had parties, we barely socialised. I've got this husband who's critiquing me like a mad dog and losing his temper at the drop of a hat, you know, and it was really unfun. So I'd sort of, every now and then, say maybe once a month or so, I'd grab a bottle of wine, come into the bedroom and just drink over the course of a night. And I'd get pretty blotto, I suppose. I mean, one bottle of wine for one person, there's a fair whack of drinks in there. Is that like an 8 standard drinks? But like it'd be from like 6 p.m. till 12 midnight, so it was not like it was done in an hour. And I would sit in the room and listen to music and feel really dejected and miserable about my life because I wasn't having a social life and I wasn't having any fun. And so I sort of went from I don't drink, we join a wine club, and now I'm here on a Friday night getting a little bit blotto, listening to music. And again, I could take it or leave it. It wasn't that every Friday night I had to have the wine. Oh my God, I'm going to go crazy if I don't have it. It wasn't like that at all. It was like every now and then I'd just be like, I feel really whatever. I'm just going to go in the room with a bottle and drink. So, this is what the council was talking about. Before we saw Terry, we had to fill in this form about, you know, how many drinks a week do you have, and you know, how often do you drink, and, you know, do you drink to get drunk, and yada yada. So I'm answering these questions. And from her perspective, and maybe yours as well, she was reading my answers and thinking, there's something wrong with how you're dealing with life and using alcohol to deal with it, right? And yeah, okay, she's got a point. But she wasn't factoring in the situation where I could go weeks and weeks and weeks without drinking, months without drinking. It wasn't that I had to have a drink. It wasn't that I was sort of desperate to have a drink and drinking nightly, and once I started I couldn't stop and things like that. I could take it or leave it. Although I will admit I did get to a point where if I had 1 or 2 glasses of wine and I started to get really tipsy, I would love that buzz and want more and more. So it did get to a point where sometimes I would have a drink and then just go through a whole bottle because, hey, you know. So, yeah. But I don't know, like, what constitutes as an alcoholic, and maybe there's different terms. I feel like being able to stop at any time means that I'm not an alcoholic because I'm not addicted. That's just my take, right? So, we're seeing Counsellor Terry, and hubby tells her that I went to this work do and I got maggoted. Now granted, that work do had been years before we were at her thing talking about it. And I was really embarrassed and miffed that he'd brought it up because I hadn't wanted to go to the work do because his work culture is, let's get blotto. And the last time I'd been to one of his work do's, which was about 2-3 years prior, that was exactly what happened. People feed you drinks, they get you drinks, whatever. You just go with the flow, next thing you're maggoted. And you kind of wake up the next morning and think, what the hell? That wasn't fun, that wasn't enjoyable, that was just, you know, ended up vomiting for the rest of the night. Ugh. Right, so cut to so many years later, he wants me to go to work do, I don't want to go because of their culture, it's all, let's get maggoted. We go and I get maggoted. And I was really unhappy, I was peed off because I'd said to him, I don't want to do this work do. All everybody does there is drink, and he goes, no, that won't happen this time, and that's exactly what happened. And then we go and see this counsellor and he throws that out there as though it was my fault and, you know, I'm the one with the drinking problem because I'd gone to this work do and got hammered. And that was the course of the conversation where she says something like, can't you just not drink? And I said, I'm not an alcoholic. And she says, I think you are. And she wasn't taken into account that it actually occurred 2 years ago. And hubby had been drunk as well. You know, he didn't mention that part. He just mentions that it bothered him that I got drunk. bothered me too, because I hadn't wanted to be in there getting drunk in the first place. But anyway, in saying all this, I did have a conversation with hubby, possibly during COVID or pre-COVID, so 4 or 5 years ago now, and I'd said to him, I've noticed something, and that is that whenever we do the funky, usually I've had a drink or two prior to like get me in the mood, headspace wise, because you're going from this person doesn't flirt with you, doesn't compliment you, doesn't touch you, doesn't arouse you, doesn't lead you on in any way, shape or form, comes to bed and hopes to get lucky, right? And I would really be struggling to get into it. It would feel really cold, detached, like I'm being used, you know, kind of like a lady of the night where some dude just comes in, pays her some money, and she's got to somehow fake being aroused. I mean, I don't know how they do it, to be honest. And I suppose no wonder many of them turn to drugs in order to cope, because that's hard. That's really hard. So here I am in this situation with my husband doing something similar, where I'd have to have a drink or two just to sort of get my mind into it, because he wasn't getting me into it. And so I did notice that. I had that conversation with him. Well, when I say I had that conversation with him, that's not at all what happened. I said to him, have you ever noticed that I usually have to have a drink or two in order to get jiggy with it? And he just goes quiet, because he's like, I know you. I know where this conversation's going. I know why you're bringing this up. This is not a conversation I want to have. This is going to end real bad. I'm just better off saying nothing. And so he says nothing. And in saying that, that's just me guessing what he's thinking. But anyway, he says nothing. So it wasn't a conversation. It was me making a statement. End of. But I had noticed that. And again, it wasn't that he would put the moves on and so I'd be like, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to get the wine out and have me 50 drinks before I can do anything with you. But I had just noticed that. And so where am I going with this video? It's just interesting that over the course of the relationship, alcohol had come to play a part in my coping of the situation. Now granted, I don't think that I'm an alcoholic, and I don't really think that I have ever been an alcoholic. That is debatable though. I would definitely admit that alcohol has, or was, or did become a way for me to deal with things. There were occasions, for example, where hubby and I'd have some sort of argument, and I would just be so angry and hurt and ropeable, and I don't have a boxing thing, so I can't punch the boxing bag, you know, and I'm just really riled up, and how am I going to cope? And so sometimes I would then grab wine and have a wine or two just to sort of calm myself down. And I'd never really thought that that was going to be where my life went. I'd never really thought that alcohol was going to be a thing that I did. And in saying that too, I have heard of and spoken with numerous other partners who have partners who are on the spectrum. And substance abuse tends to be something that tends to occur a bit, either with us, the partners, as a way to cope, or with the autistic partners as a way for them to deal with life, because they're in a world that isn't made for them and they're not doing very well, I suppose. Emotionally they're struggling, they've got anxiety and other things. And obviously it would make sense that if they go to a party and they're really anxious and they have a drink or two and it starts to wind them down, you know, they're going to think, okay, alcohol helps. Next party, drink again. Next party, drink again. So it is something that is factoring a fair bit in these relationships, and probably not for everybody, and probably not just alcohol. There'd be all manner of different things we'd be doing to try to cope mentally with these situations. And so that's how it kind of rolled for me. I started off as this, not so much a teetotaler, but almost, you know, really not a drinker. And then to a point where we've joined a wine club, and like we get the wine delivered every 3 months, and it's 12 bottles. And we would go through those 12 bottles in 3 months. So I suppose if you put it like that, it's not a huge quantity to go through in 3 months. But then for others that might seem extreme, I don't know. But for me, look, you know, I can't do the maths, but 12 bottles divided by 3 months, it's, you know, maybe a bottle a week. There's me showing how bad I am at maths. And so yeah, it just ended up this thing where alcohol was this thing that was featuring in my life, whether I'd sort of meant for it to be or wanted it to be or not. But I haven't been drinking for several months now. Hardly been drinking at all. I can't even recall the last time that we had any wine in our little wine rack. But yeah, it just wasn't somewhere I saw my life going. It wasn't this thing where I had ever imagined that I was going to be even remotely dependent on a substance to get me through the hardships of life. I'd grown up with parents who didn't drink. It was not that alcohol was something that I had grown up with, and you know, like usually that works that if you have alcoholic parents or alcoholic upbringing, then you're possibly more likely to become an alcoholic. I hadn't had that situation. I had 2 parents that didn't drink specifically because their parents were alcoholics. And so, yeah, it was not something I'd ever thought that would happen. But anyway, drop a comment below. Has this featured in your world? Have you found that you drink heavily to cope? Have you found that your partner drinks heavily to cope? Have you found that other substances have started to play a part? And I do want to point out at this point in time, because I mentioned partners, when my partner and I do drink, we're really happy drunks. And again, I can see why Aspies, particularly him, would think that drinking is fun, because it opens some part of his mind that is usually closed off, and he's just more relaxed, more chilled, more funny, more fun. You know, he's never been like a really aggressive, angry, yucky drunk, and nor have I. But again, I had noticed in the last so many years that whenever I drank, I started to get really, really depressed. So I'd sort of be glum, have a few drinks, get a little bit bubbly, have like that 3rd drink, and just crash and burn. And that is why I haven't been drinking much lately, because I started to realise that it's heightening the fact that I feel empty. So yeah, I interrupted my my story with a story. Anyway, drop a comment below. Let me know how you're going with this. Is it something you can relate to? Do you think I'm an alcoholic? And as usual, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really do appreciate it.